Welcome to World and Mind, the podcast where we explore the mind and the world in all their complexity. Together, we'll dive into personal growth, uncover new ideas, and share stories of motivation, useful insights, and diverse topics of interest. Whether you're seeking inspiration or practical knowledge, this is the place for you. Let's begin.
All right, get ready, because today we are diving headfirst into one of the most fascinating empires ever, the Roman Empire. You guys sent in a ton of awesome sources about them, and I'm seriously pumped to dig in and find out what made them tick. How did they get so powerful, and why are we still so obsessed with them thousands of years later?
Well, it's true. The Romans, they really left their mark on, well, pretty much everything, didn't they? It's a story that never gets old, even for someone who studies it as much as I do.
And that's why you're the perfect person to help us break it all down. Now, to our listener, we know this is a huge topic, right? Empires that last centuries don't exactly come with spark notes. So we're going to focus on the most interesting and important stuff from everything you sent, the really mind-blowing takeaways.
Sounds good to me. Let's unearth those Roman treasures.
Okay, so one source, Sepago Texo, I think it was, said something that made me do a double take. So get this, Rome wasn't always an empire. Did you know that? It started as a republic.
You're catching on quick.
They had consuls and a senate, like some kind of ancient prototype for governments we see today.
You're exactly right. And it's actually really cool how that system, which seems kind of complicated at first glance, was a major reason for their early success. I mean, sure, their military was a big deal, like seriously tough. But it wasn't just about brute force with them. Their ability to organize, to keep things stable on the home front while they expanded their influence, that was crucial. This whole structure, as you read, it allowed them to absorb the territories and people they conquered and make them part of the system in a way that really worked, like a recipe for success.
It's like, what's that saying? A house divided against itself cannot stand. Rome's early stability, the fact that they had their own house in order, that was a foundation for everything they built.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And you know, speaking of building an empire, we have to talk about the Punic Wars, right? This wasn't some little border dispute. We're talking generations of conflict with Carthage over a century of fighting. Can you imagine?
Wow. Yeah, that's hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. Just try to imagine, like, the whole geopolitical landscape of, say, the Mediterranean being redrawn today because of a conflict like that. It'd be insane.
That's wild. And speaking of scale, I got to throw in this little factoid that blew my mind when I was reading all this. The Colosseum, you know, that iconic Roman landmark.
Oh, yeah. Who doesn't love a good gladiator story?
Right. Well, get this. It could hold something like 50,000 spectators. 50,000.
Wow, that's more people than I see on my best day.
Exactly. It makes you realize these Punic Wars weren't just about grabbing land. It was about deciding the fate of a whole civilization. So were those wars the turning point, like the thing that really set Rome on the path to becoming a superpower?
I'd say, without a doubt, the Second Punic War, especially, you know, with Scipio Africanus leading the charge, that was a power shift of epic proportions. Rome winning that war, it did more than just make them top dog in the region. It gave them this feeling of unity, of national pride, you know, like we can accomplish anything. And of course, that just made them want to expand even more.
So while their armies are out there, you know, conquering and stuff, things back in Rome weren't exactly peaceful and happy, huh? It's like the bigger and more powerful they got on the outside, the more problems popped up on the inside.
Classic story, isn't it? Sadly, it happened all too often. Rome's victories, they came with a lot of wealth and power, right? But all that new wealth, it didn't exactly fix things. In fact, it made the social problems that were already there even worse. And the source you shared about that really digs into that.
It did. And that's where things get really juicy, like something out of Shakespeare, right?
Oh, totally. Shakespeare would have had a field day with this part of Roman history. Okay, so remember how we were talking about those social problems in Rome? Well, that's a big part of what this source is all about. It talks about this growing gap between the super rich patricians and the everyday plebeians. Like, as Rome conquered more and more, the rich got richer, but the regular folks didn't see much of that wealth trickling down.
And that's where someone like Julius Caesar comes in.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this guy was a rock star general with a huge following. It's almost like, well, I don't know if there's even a modern equivalent. Maybe like a super famous general who also had like millions of followers on social media. Or so. I don't know. It's crazy. What was it about that whole dynamic that allowed someone like Caesar to get so much power?
It was a recipe for, well, I guess you could say recipe for ambition. He had this undeniable charisma, this military genius, and he knew exactly how to use those simmering social tensions to his advantage. It wasn't just about being a war hero. He was a populist. Remember that source we talked about before, the one about social class? This is where it all comes together. Caesar saw how unhappy the plebeians were. They were the ones fighting Rome's wars, but they weren't seeing many rewards for it. So Caesar, he taps into that resentment. He starts promising land reform, economic relief, all sorts of things the plebeians wanted to hear. And he uses their support as leverage against the old elites. It's a tale as old as time, sadly.
Yeah, it sounds sadly familiar. It's like a masterclass in how to take over Rome. Okay, so speaking of power moves, we got to talk about Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Can you imagine that scene? Caesar and his legions marching across that river. Talk about a bold move. The source made it clear that was the point of no return for Caesar, this direct challenge to the Senate. And then, of course, there's the assassination. The Ides of March. Was all that drama, that tragic ending, was it bound to happen?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It makes you wonder, what if things had gone differently? But Caesar, he had ambition in spades. And his actions, even though they were calculated, a lot of the Roman elite saw them as a step too far. He represented both the promise and the danger of unchecked ambition. So his assassination, as shocking as it was also a message, a reminder that even the most powerful people aren't above the law. Or in this case, the daggers of their enemies, I guess.
Talk about a cautionary tale. But here's the thing, and this is what I find so interesting. You'd think Caesar's death would have been the end of the story, but it's actually just the beginning of something even bigger. Because it wasn't Caesar who created the Roman Empire, was it? The source, it points to Augustus, Caesar's adopted son, as a real mastermind behind it all. What made Augustus so different?
Right. It's wild. It's like Caesar set the stage, but Augustus, he was the one who knew how to work it. He was incredibly smart and a brilliant politician. Where Caesar was all about bold action, Augustus, he was more subtle. He knew that just using force wouldn't be enough to keep everything together. He had to convince the Roman people to win their hearts and minds to create a system that worked.
So how did he do it?
Yeah.
What was his secret?
He was a master of playing the long game. He knew how to get power, but he also knew how to make it look like the Republic was still in charge, like respecting tradition, even while he was completely changing how things worked behind the scenes. Image was everything for Augustus. He knew how to use symbols and grand gestures to his advantage. And it was this mix of control and, well, let's be honest, a little bit of clever manipulation that allowed him to usher in this period of peace and prosperity, the Pax Romana, that I'm sure you came across in your research.
Pax Romana, right.
Yeah.
It does sound kind of nice after all that chaos we were just talking about.
It really was a remarkable period. And Augustus, he wasn't just all talk. He backed up that whole Pax Romana thing with real changes. Like, he totally overhauled the Roman army.
Oh, yeah, I read about that.
Yeah, instead of it being like a tool for whoever was the most ambitious general, he made it into a professional fighting force. That made things way more stable, both in Rome and in all those territories they conquered.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
A stable empire needs a strong army that's loyal to the emperor. But what about those, massive building projects he was so into? I mean, I read about those too. The source mentioned aqueducts and stuff. Were those just for show, or was there more to it than that?
Augustus. Oh, he was all about the image. Remember when we were talking about the Colosseum? Yeah, it was this incredible feat of engineering, a place for entertainment and all that. But it was also this powerful symbol of Rome's power and what they were capable of. It's like he was saying, look at what we can achieve together under my leadership. Pretty smart, huh?
Yeah, it's a classic power move. It's all about legacy, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of which, let's talk about what I think is the coolest part of this whole Roman Empire thing. The fact that we're still talking about them today, thousands of years later, they're still influencing us. There's their culture, their ideas, they're woven into the fabric of, Western civilization at least.
Totally. That source that talked about Trajan, when the Roman Empire was at its biggest geographically, it's impressive and all, but you're right. It's not really about how much land they conquered. It's more about the cultural stuff, the institutions they left behind. That's what still resonates with us today. I mean, think about it. The languages we speak, the legal systems we have, even the way our cities are designed, it all goes back to Rome in some way.
Okay, but break that down for me a little.
Yeah.
How does ancient Rome, actually impact someone living in the 21st century?
All right, we'll take languages, for example. Romance languages, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, they all come from Latin, the language of ancient Rome. Or think about legal principles like innocent until proven guilty, or the right to a fair trial. Those are all rooted in Roman law, and those ideas are still the foundation of so many legal systems today. And we can't forget about their architecture and engineering. I mean, come on, those aqueducts, the roads, the Colosseum, obviously. They were seriously impressive builders. The Romans, they weren't just about conquering land. They were about spreading their ideas, their way of life.
Right. It's like that quote we mentioned before. Rome was more than an empire. It was an idea. It's kind of deep when you think about it.
It really is. Their influence, it went way beyond just their military power or their political power.
No.
They gave us concepts, structures that have shaped how we think, how we govern ourselves for centuries. Makes you wonder, what will our legacy be, you know?
Yeah.
Like, what will people be talking about thousands of years from now?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the birth of the Roman Republic to the rise and fall of their empire, and even their lasting impact on us today. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to discover about ancient Rome. But hopefully this has sparked your curiosity, given you some new insights, and maybe inspired you to do a little digging of your own. So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep learning.
Thank you for listening to World and Mind. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who might find it helpful or inspiring. Remember, every step in the journey matters, and together we can keep exploring new ideas and creating a better world. Until next time, stay curious, stay motivated, and keep growing.